It's so exciting to hear the conversation and just hear the theatre absolutely erupt with the conversation. We've got time to continue it, but first we've got tough questions, which is going to be bloody exciting. Now, the questions have come in over the last couple of days. They're pretty provocative. They're going to be very interesting, Liz. If you want to be part of the conversation, which Liz is going to throw to you at different times, we're going to have a Slido QR code that's going to come up, so if you're able to use that. And joining our incredible Liz Brannan is a panel of agricultural leaders ready to tackle these tough questions. Andrew Bate is a farmer turned innovator. Andrew's the co-founder and CEO of Swarm Farm Robotics. Tess Cook, an AgriFutures Horizon Scholar. Adam Fennessy, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Anthony Lee, CEO and Director of Australian Country Choice. Professor Jacqueline McLeod, the founder and Chief Scientific Officer of Downforce Technologies. Joe Shepherd, the CEO of the Queensland Farmers Federation. So Liz, the stage is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. And welcome, panel. Perfect. So, as Ollie mentioned, these questions have been fielded from all of you over the last couple of weeks, so we're really looking forward to getting into some of these meaty questions today. So these are the voices tackling the big questions, so don't hold back. As Ollie mentioned, feel free to interact on the QR code. We want short, snappy, sharp comments, which we'll show on the screen behind us as well. So, to throw to our first question comes from an audience member who first stood on this stage as a Future Young Leader in 2023. 2 years on, she's still asking the big questions about workforce strategy. Please welcome Malka Mukenschnabel.
For evokeAG, as a Future Young Leader in 2023, with a workforce solution. 2 years later, I stand here and I'm still wondering, do we have a workforce vision and strategy, and who is in charge of it?
Jiminy Crickets, that cuts straight to the heart of what evokeAG is all about, people. Joe, I'm going to start with you as the CEO of an organisation that represents interests of peak ag industry bodies. Do we have a unified workforce vision? And if not, where does the responsibility lie?
I think it's a great question. Thank you for a great question, but I think it points to a bigger question, and that is, do we actually have a national workforce strategy and vision for all sectors? Because I think if we were to be in the most effective place we could be, that's where we would start. We would have a really effective national strategy that addresses workforce attraction and retention for all industries. Ag would then have a very strong seat at that table. But I think without that overarching support network, it's really difficult for ag as one sector to innovate and lead in that space. I'll give you an example. At Queensland Farmers Federation, we are sponsoring the permanent residency of a very smart young man who's an engineer, highly skilled, currently working with us in agriculture. It has taken 18 months for QFF to just be approved as a sponsoring organisation. So in the meantime, this young man and his partner, both highly skilled, are in limbo waiting to see whether or not their permanent residency comes through. So I think we have some work to do in that place. I think all of us have a role to play. So, federal government, state government, industry. At QFF, I'm seeing a great initiative called Smart Ag Queensland, which you may have heard of. It's a collaboration between Cotton Australia, Queensland fruit and veggie growers and cane growers, and we have delivered workforce skills to Queensland agriculture. Over 1,200 people have been through training of some kind in just over 8 months with a 99% completion rate. Absolutely incredible. So I think we all have a role to play, industry, community, working very closely in a supportive umbrella that the state government and the federal government really need to provide.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. And I'm going to take that thread that you mentioned around all of us needing to work together, and I'm actually going to throw to Tess for the kind of next perspective. A few weeks ago, as a Horizon Scholar, you were involved in a significant workshop last year about the branding involved in workforce in the ag industry, trust, perceptions, those kinds of things. As a young leader entering the industry, what's your take?
I think my take on this question is you talk about a unified workforce, but You can't unify a workforce that we currently don't have. The issue around workforce in the agricultural industry is very apparent right now. Entering into the agricultural industry as a young person is very difficult. I'm fourth generation on a cropping and cattle property in central Queensland, and yet I struggled to find a way into the agricultural industry. All throughout my boarding school experience, I was going to career counsellors and I was constantly being told to use my potential to be a doctor or to be a nurse. Never, not once, was I pushed into agriculture. It was my passion of being born on the land that made me want to become a veterinarian, which I am now. And that passion wouldn't have been sparked even more so if I hadn't had the opportunity to do short courses at places such as the Emerald Ag College. So being able to have a pathway into ag, that is what we need to focus on in schools, making sure that there's careers open and that people know about them.
I wholeheartedly agree, and as someone who has been a woman in ag, I think that, and sometimes I think gender plays into that as well. Andrew, I'm going to throw to you next. Just a few weeks ago, Jobs and Skills Australia released a report, an essential ingredient, the food supply chain workforce, laying out the realities we're facing. Before we get into all things robotics, I'd love to get your take on how you see these workforce challenges play out in the supply chain.
Yeah, I think, where is our strategy? I mean, something I really noticed, because I still farm as well as do robotics, but what happened to ag colleges? There is no strategy. They disappeared, and I keep meeting young kids who want to get into ag that just need that bridge to get in, to build some skill base before they get into ag, to kind of get a feeling for what bit of ag suits them, which part they want to be. Is it livestock? Is it irrigated? Is it intensive horticulture? Is it where they want to be? Is it in agronomy? And those ag colleges used to provide that service and build that, give that pathway and that bridge for our kids who wanted to get into ag, and it's no longer there. And as those ag colleges are closed, there's just nothing to replace them. And I'm seeing that more and more, meeting more and more young kids who want to get into ag, they just aren't sure. And I just wish we had that back. So it's something I think we've lost.
Fantastic. I'm going to throw to Jackie and I'm going to come back to you. I love this. We're already fighting for the questions. Jackie, your perspective, global, you might have a bit of a global lens on this, and I'll come back to you, Adam, champing at the bit. Love it. Jackie.
So for those of you who don't know me, welcome, Sopo Aleng. I actually am living in Kenya, in Nairobi, but I'm married to a chief of the Maasai tribe. And I see a completely different dynamic, which I think maybe we should have a long conversation about because I'm in a country with 58 million people, but the dividend on demography is incredible. 70% of those people are between the ages of 18 and 35. Every one of them has been brought up on a farm or land, and they are absolutely skilled. So when I think about the kind of workforce strategy that you're developing, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to have a workforce where there's a genuine international exchange of young people, literally people who've lived in the same kind of conditions as you have here, extreme climate events, learning from each other with great ideas. I mean, one thing about Kenyans is they're the best hustlers in the world. They have a portfolio. So I see workforce strategies as not being contained and being siloed around, let's say, just Australia, but reaching out and creating, let's say, a new intergenerational workforce who's comfortable, essentially, with working with each other and bringing the best of ideas all around the agricultural sector. And that would be my plea, I think, to this conversation.
Fantastic, Jackie. Oh, we've got a little round of applause. Brilliant. You have a couple of seconds.
Okay, a couple of seconds. So because I'm from the Commonwealth Government, I think the national government does have a role to play. So you heard from Minister Anthony Chisholm just a bit earlier. Yesterday, he and I co-chaired the Australian Agricultural Workforce Forum here in Brisbane. It's met 5 times in about the last year. And we commissioned that Jobs and Skills Australia food supply chain study that you referenced. We need the data. That tells us what are our needs in horticulture, meat and livestock, dairy, grain, and also where across Australia. And then how do we work with universities, TAFEs, vet providers, schools. The one other thing I wanted to mention, because it goes to Tessa's point, we've kicked off a new program called Ag Career Start, which targets uni students and puts them on placements in agribusinesses, farms and across the ag sector. We've had about 130 uni students go through so far. We've got another 50 or so this year. So that gives them real life experience and shows them how wonderful those careers are. And then my last point is, I know you're off to New Zealand, and that shows how we are connecting globally as well as locally. We've got to throw everything at this.
Fantastic. We're going to throw to our next question, and I can feel Anthony just like ready to launch into the conversation. So we better get to like make sure it doesn't burst. So we're going to throw to our next question from Eilish King, a Horizon scholar currently studying at the University of Sydney.
Donald Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports could have severe ripple effects on Australian agribusiness supply chains and trade relations. Australia often prides itself on its special relationship with the US, but as we've seen with previous trade wars, loyalty doesn't equal exemption. So how does Australian agriculture build true trade resilience in an era of economic nationalism? Do we need a new strategy for diversifying export markets and reducing reliance on volatile global players like the US?
Adam, I'm going to throw to you first as the Secretary of the Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry. It's the first time Australian exports have really been caught in the crossfire of a US trade war. What is the government strategy to protect Australian agribusiness from these tariffs and future trade shocks?
So we are doing a lot of work right now, both behind the scenes and upfront with our US colleagues. So some of you will know and others won't know, we export more than $15 billion worth of agricultural produce to the United States. They're our second biggest trading partner. At the same time, the US has a 2-to-1 trade surplus with Australia. So that's a good starting point because we've heard what policies they've been discussing in the US. We also have a 20-year-old free trade agreement. That's really important. And we've got a long tradition of partnership working with the United States, and everyone right up to the Prime Minister has been very clear about that, and he's been talking to the new US President. So firstly, it's taking a coordinated approach across Australian government and industry with everything we do. Thinking about meat and livestock, that's a huge opportunity and a risk. The US beef herd has been lowered in the last few years because of drought, so we really complement what the US needs, and it's not just raw produce, it's value-added mince. And everyone knows that certain people like eating hamburgers. Australian mince really helps the quality of hamburgers in the United States. So it's been very coordinated, working through all of our senior ministers up to the Prime Minister, as well as the Australian Ambassador. And the Minister for Agriculture, Julie Collins, is about to meet with, or at least meet over the phone with, the new Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rowlands, who was confirmed over the weekend. So we are using every hour to be well prepared for our negotiations with the United States.
Fantastic. I'm going to come to you in a moment, Jackie. Given we spoke about hamburgers, your reflections on the impact of what's happening in the States.
Yeah, look, we've always had something going on globally. We're a net exporter. There's never been a time where it's all been perfect. So you've got to have diversification of market. You've got to have diversification of product. That's just what you need. If you are too over-indexed into one market, you're asking for trouble. So, I think that's a really important fact. And then the second part for me is, how do we constantly innovate? How are we coming up with the new, products that aren't there on the market today, so that demand for our product is always there, and never rest on our laurels, always trying to create that next product that draws in opportunities. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. To take it out, I guess, to another, even more global perspective, given the advancements that Downforce has had in the land health accounting, I'd be interested in whether you see this as a temporary shift or something a little bit more permanent.
Well, the one thing I learned in 40 years, having been a commission official in the European Commission for 10 years, and then being in the UN, is that politicians are very fickle. Sorry, Adam. And they come and they go. But farmers stay. And one of the things that I noticed tremendously around the world in all the conversations below the level of food security is that countries are ill-prepared to change the diversity of goods that are going out of their country. If I look at Australia, you're literally at the cutting edge of, unfortunately, a lot of climate issues. Therefore, being ready for what the rest of the world is going to experience gives you an advantage. So do we have the kinds of foods and crops that will necessarily be required by the rest of the world? Well, we don't. Chia seeds, all these different kinds of things need to start appearing, and where best to try them here with some of the best farmers who are likely to make a success of crops and products that are going to be really out there to meet the global demand for food. So what I'd say is get your shop in order, grow the things that we know we're going to need in the future, be ready, and then, trade relations come and go, make friendly kind of advances everywhere, keep those channels open. But having gone through Brexit, I can tell you, it's never quite the family, traditional, wonderful relationship you think you had. It can go just like that. So be careful, is all I would say. But grow the things that we know the world is going to need in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jackie. Any other comments from the panel like to weigh in on this question? Any additional comments? No, beautiful. Well, just a reminder and also an invitation. We'd love to hear your perspectives using the QR code up on the screen. If Australia can't rely on our special relationship with the US, what's the next strategic move? We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So, next question we're going to throw to is from Edward Barraclough.
Agritech promises to solve farming's biggest challenges, yet funding seems to favour shiny ideas over proven impact. Are we chasing hype over substance? And how can startups cut through the noise to secure investment for real-world solutions?
Feel like this question was made for you, Andrew. As someone who has built a global ag tech company from the ground up, what's your take? How do we shift that investment?
I'm twitching a bit here.
Good.
So, I think and we're all guilty of it, right? We put too much emphasis on someone raised money, they're successful. It's bullshit. Money rains from the ceiling for some companies, and as you point out, shiny companies. All that really matters is, are you building something that farmers want, and are they prepared to pay for it? And that's how success should be measured, not measured against who raised what money they got, how shiny they are. And yet, we're all guilty of it. It's a bad habit to get into, and you've got to check yourself at times on that. But if you think about how do we make this better and where do we see, I believe that we need to dismantle the way we do research with universities in this country. This might be harsh, but I don't even really know what a lot of our universities do in terms of research. Maybe they should focus on educating our kids and delivering, and I'm sure they do some great stuff, and there are good examples out there. But I think we've got this issue in our country. We talk about R&D. We need more R&D for this industry. We need more R&D for this problem. And we keep saying R&D, but it shouldn't be put together. R&D are totally separate things. They shouldn't go together. Absolutely. They're like oysters and custard. Research is new discoveries, new to science. Things that you can publish in papers that universities do. Development is taking an idea and getting it ready for industry so it can be commercialised. And universities don't do that, and they don't do it well. And I think until we split those two things up and think about how we can do that better in our industry, we're going to see research happening, but farmers not benefiting, and then ag tech's not able to grow and scale. And the reality is, there's not huge checks being written with Australian investors. To raise money to expand and grow a business and grow markets, you have to go overseas to raise larger rounds and get investment. But if we can optimise our research and our development separately to actually accelerate the smart thinking and the smart stuff we've got going in this country and develop it through so it can be commercialised, Australian ag techs can grow, can get to the next stage, they can scale, they can build stuff people want, they can show some income, and then they're in a good position to raise money. And it's not about the shiny rounds, it's about building stuff that people want, delivering to industry. And I think that's just so important because we've got to use our advantage. We don't have a lot of investment money here. It's not likely to happen anytime soon. But we have got this opportunity to fund things the right way that actually delivers for our industry and allows our ag tech industry to flourish. And ultimately, we're another export industry, taking our technology to the world. Like we think of an export of beef, coal, all these other things. Our ag tech industry is absolutely an export industry that brings income and opportunity back into Australia. And that's what I think we're missing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew. And I think that distinction between research, almost full stop, and development, but it was interesting. So I lived and worked in Papua New Guinea and worked with the Australian Centre for International Ag Research, and they had this really, I think, wonderful way of research for development. So there's a distinction that it wasn't just research. Research for research's sake is important, but having that development outcome was really important. Yeah. Anthony, I'm going to throw to you next. interested to kind of talk about scale and whether you see this investment as just hype or is there real impact being made?
Yeah, well, the first thing, business want real impact. That is a non-negotiable. That's what we're after. One of the challenges we have, and the RDCs, is there is so much coming at us. So to work out what's real and what's not, and to really get to a point quickly of understanding, well, is it a good idea, but also can it be scaled up commercially, viably? That's the critical thing. And if that's all possible, then absolutely there's real opportunity. I would encourage ag tech companies to, before you approach RDCs, approach businesses. You know, go and work with a reputable company, and if that company likes your tech and wants to go into the RDC with you, you'll have a lot bigger impact by doing that. And if you don't, or if the RDCs don't want it and the businesses don't want it, you really need to think about what you're producing. Are you producing something that you want, or are you producing something that the industry wants? So that would be my challenge to you all.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree with you more. Jo, I'm interested to see how you see this plays out real time across industry. Are we missing opportunities, or are we, when we get caught up in the hype?
I think, yes, there's definitely hype, but I think hype can actually be a positive and a negative. So I think, you know, the hype can be good in terms of raising awareness of opportunities and challenges, but it also can be really challenging for farmers who can drown in the white noise. So I think it has pros and cons. I think there's a role for government and for peak bodies like myself to help farmers make informed decisions when it comes to tech. We have been doing that in the energy space for over a decade. And I think what we've done in energy really directly applies to what we could do in tech to help people make informed decisions. I think, you know, it's already been said, we need to be responding to a need. We need to be, R&D needs to be very close to the customer, to industry. We are seeing uptake. I think there's a bit of a narrative that suggests that we're not seeing uptake, but we are seeing uptake. We're seeing uptake on individual farms who are incorporating tech in a whole multitude of ways to either improve their profitability, productivity, or to solve a problem that they have. We're also seeing uptake in terms of transforming industries. And an example I can point to is a company called Rela, R-E-L-A, if you have time to Google them. So they have developed an amazing product, which is a combination of expertise and a tech platform that is literally changing the way farmers and agriculture engage in the renewable energy sector. So I think if the need's there, if you're close to the customer, if you respond, the opportunity is very real.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jo. Back to the audience. So what needs to change? We'd love to hear your views in the QR codes. We can see some of those comments up on the screen. Is it about smarter investment, or is it about this collaboration, or is it about both? Do we need to overhaul how it is that we invest in ag tech? I'm going to jump to our next question. Let's move to a question from Emma Darlinson.
Good morning. How are governments meaningfully collaborating on the global stage to implement and measure sustainable agricultural solutions? And beyond carbon credits, what emerging innovations in regenerative agriculture, water cycles, and land management will drive real impact and financial incentives for farmers?
Adam, intersect of government policy and industry. What's your take? Where do you see that meaningful collaboration between with governments globally in both implementing and measuring?
So a few things I'll say. Firstly, we work very carefully across the Australian government with the Treasury, with our Environment Climate Change Department around how we're working in the global system of climate change, climate finance, as well as practice change. Across Australia, we work very closely and in the research context with our universities, and I know there are a lot here today, UQ, QUT, Griffith, La Trobe, I could list a lot more of the universities. Those universities are also globally connected. I know La Trobe Uni, for example, have brought plug and play out here. So we're learning from California through La Trobe. That's another way. And then we very consciously work through our international networks in the Australian government. So we work with the Food and Agricultural Organisation, which is part of the UN. Now, all of that is good, but picking up on Anthony's comment and Jo's, it can't be just research for research's sake. I think it's really important to follow what the customer wants. And what I've learned in my role is looking at global supply chains, global companies, and how they're responding, because they're having investment decisions and boardroom decisions. So I think governments have got to look at that too. And a really good example that Anthony would be familiar with is the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework was led by beef industry, Australian beef industry, and that's about what the consumer will want, because someone eating their burger perhaps in the US or in Europe or in South America might want to know, well, what's the carbon footprint? And then that burger chain will probably want to show people what that footprint is. So a lot of that is customer driven, and then the research and the global collaboration's got to fit in behind that, all the way through to the costs of offsetting your carbon. And to me, it's got to be as much a business decision as a government and regulatory decision.
Pulling that global thread, I'm going to jump to you again, Jackie. Governments all around the world are doing the dance between, sustainability, the economics, and something passionate to my heart, food security. So where are the real successes around the world that we can point to, and what can we learn from what you see is happening out in the big wide world?
Well, so I think the first thing is that governments have a role to create the space in which we can operate. You go down the prescriptive route at your peril if you're a government. But having said that, what are these facilitating spaces? And I think both Joe and Andy have said exactly what that is. Create the space which is safe for new ideas to emerge, work collaboratively, and actually bring those into the marketplace. And I'll point to a couple of examples which I feel have been really instrumental in changing people's minds and government, because it's a two-way street. So one, for example, in the fibre industry. We've been talking about consumer demand, wanting to know where things have come from. Well, then you've got to do something. And if you waited for research that's coming, I have to say, unfortunately, through publicly funded research, you'd still be waiting. But Good Earth Cotton, Fibre Trace, all of these things give the consumer what they want. Did we have the space in which to operate? Yes, in some senses we did. But we need government to recognise what's coming down the line between sustainability and so on. It is not a trade-off. Actually, you can get sustainability and be economically successful and deliver prosperity. That's what we want. We don't want one or the other. I would also point to things like the new banking arrangements, which, for example, Oxbury launched a couple of weeks ago with Downforce, which gives a transition facility at a rate which actually no other bank has been able to compete with. I can tell you the demand from farmers is there. For 6 to 8 years, you get a facility, no service fee, one above base point. Who doesn't want to get a loan to take the hit as you make the transition? These are the kind of things. We need insurance to be able to play its role, to de-risk the kind of transitions that we're going to face. So government has a role. It's creating the enabling environment, should avoid being too prescriptive, but allow kind of from the bottom up research that really is meaningful, like Bula doing farm trials. These are incredibly exciting, but they get to be put into practice within a year, not waiting 5 years for the results. So that's what I'm looking for from governments. And the governments that can succeed now to create that exciting environment are the ones that will be leaders of countries that will succeed, without a doubt.
Fantastic.
Yes, we need the research. We also need the development.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Underscoring that point again. Anthony, I'd be interested in from a large vertically integrated business, from a business perspective, like the impacts, but also you mentioned trade-offs, because I don't think it's always been like that there's no trade-off. So I'm interested in your thoughts about perhaps what the incentives might be, or whether you need incentives.
Look, win-win outcomes, that's what we need, and they're there. They are actually there today. You improve the health of your soil, which improves the health of your legumes, of your pastures, of your timber. You improve the health and performance of your cattle or your livestock. It's good for the environment and it's good for your business. Like, they're there today. What I see are the problems is measurement at scale. How do we, in a 2 million acre property, where we've done some wonderful things about improving those things, viably measure the outcome of that? Because there's things happening today, right now, and I feel like the tech needs to catch up with how do we measure that, and then if we can quantify that works, then we can roll out those sort of best practices more broadly and then get the incentives for it.
I'll see you later. We've got the answer.
Fantastic. Any other reflections from the panel or additional comments to make?
I wouldn't mind adding one point. I know working from small farmers to large businesses, it's know your number. You know, you measure what matter. How do you measure your own business impacts? And also, how do governments make it easier and not harder to use the one tool or a consistent tool? So we've put a lot of money to invest in that so that businesses aren't chasing a whole lot of different competing measurements. And if it's going to work in Australia, how does that link in with what's coming out of the European Union or North America? It's not easy, but that's where governments have a role, and then it goes all the way back to you measure what matters.
Yep, I think that... Andrew.
Yeah, and I think also, what are we measuring for? As a farmer, I want to get my soil carbon up so I can grow better crops, and that will pay off, and that's a measurement for me that really counts. Policies will change, regulations will change, all sorts of things, but ultimately what really counts is how productive my farm is, how much carbon I can get in my soil, because that gives me a more fertile, productive soil, and we can't forget about that too. There's measurement, there's credits, there's all these other things. They're great, but ultimately, to be the best farmer I can be, the more carbon I can get in my soil, the better I'm going to be.
Fantastic.
So from me, I think the challenge I think we have as a society is approaching this in a holistic way. I think we need to look at environmental outcomes, we need to look at growing a really profitable, sustainable ag sector, but we also need to consider vibrant regional communities for the future. And until we start to address this challenge holistically, looking at all those boxes, I think we're not going to be effective, and actually we're going to set up some pretty disappointing unintended consequences for future generations. So I think that's the key challenge. When I work with government, both at the state and the federal level, I am not seeing that happen yet. So I think that's the key challenge for all of us.
Brilliant. Collaboration, industry, government, having that harmonisation of tools and ensuring that those incentives aren't just financial, but they have that environmental component, and to your point around regional communities as well. We're going to jump to our next question. Keep having the conversation online. I can see these flicking up in my periphery. We actually want to get into them as well. So our next question comes from Nigel Barrett.
Okay, Nigel Barrett from FABA, Australia's Food and Beverage Accelerator. Why is wages are too high so often the default excuse for business challenges in Australia? Instead of fixating on labour costs, why aren't more business leaders focusing on innovation, productivity, research and development and competitive advantages to drive growth?
So Anthony, I can imagine you pay a few people in your, significantly large business, whole supply chain, working across the whole supply chain. Is it just about wages, or do we need a bigger conversation about innovation, efficiency and leadership?
Yeah, look, it's definitely both. Any prudent business is always watching their costs. I mean, we're seeing in cost of living crisis, this stuff, if not managed, is passed on, and that's a problem. So we need to really make sure we're aware of our costs. Labour is the biggest line item in the P&L, so it attracts the most attention. That's absolutely what we need to do. But I would say that the cheapest cost is not always the best cost too. And that's what we've learnt definitely, that, you're not trying to chase it to the bottom. But I think more importantly to your point, and there's absolutely opportunity in it, revenue is the side. There is more opportunity, or it's easier to add 10% to your revenue than it is to take 10% off your costs. So, there's an unlimited opportunity to be value adding our product. What's the next opportunity to use it in interesting ways? A lot of what we think about agriculture is we produce food and fibre. There is so much more that we produce that you guys often don't know about out of the animal or out of the crop or whatever that is great for society. I mean, we're powering airlines, cosmetics, we've got pharmaceuticals. There's so much in there, and that's come from actually the ag tech of understanding that can be put into that product, and then your value is increased. So yes, control your costs as best you can, but absolutely the upside is the revenue opportunities.
Fantastic, thank you. Adam, you're in a bit of a unique position to see how this government and business might kind of interplay on this particular issue. Is it really about wages, or is this a bit of an oversimplification?
I think Anthony put it well. It's about a whole range of drivers for a business, and then for how governments work with that. Input costs are critical. Productivity, labour, regulation. So governments have got to be very aware of what that impact is, as do businesses. A lot of the nations we compete with in international agriculture, some have very high labour costs, some have very low labour costs. The premium and the revenue side is really important. I've been part of overseas trade delegations. International markets are prepared to pay premiums for very high quality beef, barley into beer, seafood. At the same time, if you're competing on a commodity basis, you've got to be very clear about your input costs. And the cheapest cost is not always the best cost. A great local example, and I'm going to indulge here, Anthony, I've been to your Cannon Hill processing plant, Australian Country Choice. It's very impressive. One of the things I like the most about it is the incredible range of nationalities in your workforce, and having a good, well-trained, skilled workforce. Of course, you want to make sure that you're optimising your costs, but I imagine that's as important a part of your business because of that stability and the commitment, the investment you put into your workforce and that you get out of your workforce. So, and in cost of living, it's also important that people are paid, a decent wage they can live on. So I would say that the wages are too high comment can overlook the fact that there's a multiplicity of issues. And yes, you've got to look at productivity, and we also at government, the government level, need to think about profitability. If we don't have profitable businesses, you're not there just to bide your time. So how do we support productive agricultural businesses that can make a profit so that you can keep the regional and economic development and employment and the $94 billion of ag fisheries forestry that we produce each year.
Jo, I'd be interested to bring you in on this one. Do you have a similar view, or is it wages, or is it we lacking that forward-thinking leadership?
I think leadership, innovation, looking to the needs of future workforces is really important, but you can't discount wages. So when I talk to farming enterprises, wages and energy are two of the key line items. And I think the elephant in the room is the industrial relations system in Australia has become so complex that it actually is untenable for most businesses. I think if we want to, think about how we increase value without cutting costs, I think we need to really, as a first step and a first priority, look at the red tape that all businesses are now wrapped up in when it comes to managing their workforces. If you're an industry like horticulture and you're actually reliant on a fairly casualised workforce, the recent IR reforms at a federal level have really made it very difficult for your business. So I think as a first step, I would like us, before we get too fancy, to actually look at our IR system and cut the red tape and make it more sustainable, more tenable, more workable, so that we can create a value proposition in terms of workforce and bring workers and employers closer together, not drive wedges between them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jo. Let's move to actually, before I do, any final other comments from the table?
Well,
Jackie.
This one going to be really unpopular, so okay, get ready.
Brilliant.
So I work with a lot of companies in Kenya who export internationally. Flowers, beans, you've read it, from Kenya. But the appealing thing about having a skilled workforce also in another country, and I'm talking now about diversifying, is that you can achieve those levels of quality. It can still be part of an Australian business, for example, why not? But what you actually then start to do is build an intergenerational, a Gen Z approach to how we're going to tackle food security. And I think it's really important to recognise that young people around the world are talking to each other every day. We're no longer in isolated parts, not talking. And so recognising that is something I still believe in. We may see multilateralism drop over the edge, but frankly, if we don't connect young people around the world to grow the food that we need, then we're lost. So yes, there's a wage issue because, of course, wages are much less in certain countries. But if we could invest in those workforces to get them skilled and have the right working conditions, then you get a double benefit. That's what I see.
Have we got time to go?
You have 10 seconds, my friend. You won't go? Okay, right, we'll jump to our last question then. Fantastic. Sean Hilton.
Sean Hilton from ACO Certification. As automation and digital technologies revolutionise agriculture, boosting efficiency and reducing workforce needs, how do we ensure rural communities don't face the same fate as towns that lost their local bank branches? What must be done to ensure the benefits of agtech innovation flow through to rural economies, sustaining jobs, services and vibrant communities?
Andrew, I'm going to throw to you first because I think, as someone who develops tech and has been part of this ag tech revolution, and also part of ag-dependent communities, right? Like it's, you're not distinct from them. I'm interested in your take on how we ensure that this tech-driven progress doesn't come at the cost of regional communities.
It's a very good question. I mean, just to reflect back on banks, the reason banks aren't opening more branches in our rural communities, the reason that there's less of them, that's their business model. That's how they make money. It's a corporate environment. They return the money to the shareholders. They're incentivised to pull as much as they can out for that, and it's just part of, the situation we're in with banking in rural communities, that it will continue to pull out because returns in a corporate environment. People would ask, people used to say to us when we started, why would you build an ag tech company out of Guindy, population of about 15 people, 7 hours, 700 something kilometres north of here. Everyone said we need to be in a capital city, and we chose not to, and that's been our natural advantage at Swarm Farm Robotics. We completely immersed in farming. We turned engineers into farmers, and that's been our secret sauce that's got us to market and made stuff that people want, because we actually built stuff on farm, tested it. It's the stuff that goes wrong at 3 o'clock in the morning that actually makes our technology usable for farmers, because we work it out right then and fix it, and we're back farming the next morning. Something we're really passionate about is building rural communities, and people say robotics and things are going to take jobs away. I see an opportunity to revitalise rural Australia, and this is part of our vision, because we think it's just so important that we build our communities, we bring more people in, we get more people engaged in agriculture. No one's ever bought one of our robots and fired someone. The conversation we get, and it comes over and over again, we want this technology on our farm because we want to bring more young people into agriculture, get them involved in our operation, get them into our community. This is the technology they want to work with, and we need this technology on our farm if we're going to engage the next generation. And part of what we planned, we believe in right to repair, that farmers should be able to repair their own gear, they should be able to support their own technology. We've built a model for Swarm Farm that scales globally but scales regionally. And it's about independent support models where people can choose to repair their own robots, or other businesses can set up locally and become support agents and provide service for our technology as it rolls out around the world. So, what it actually allows is small businesses, micro businesses, medium-sized businesses, larger businesses out in rural regions and towns support our technology and provide a service and a support experience that's far beyond what we see with traditional dealership models. And if we can revitalise towns, if we can let that income stay back in those in those regions, that vitalises our towns and gives us more opportunities for people to grow. And we do the same thing with our partners. Our partners are based on our partnerships of people that integrate their technology on board our robots. And there's 15 companies around Australia that build attachments that go on our robots, and they're growing their market share. And a lot of those are regional companies that build ag tech for the regions. But if you spin that back around, to the banking thing and corporatisation, if you look at the way farming machinery's done now, it's all done through dealership models. And, we've got supersizing of dealerships now. It's no longer your local dealer. It's some corporate from the US that owns massive amounts of dealerships all over the area. And the value, I've still got John Deere and Case equipment. The value I got from my dealer 15 years ago is nothing today. I get nothing compared to what I used to get years ago. By the time I talk to the sales guy, I know more about that machine before I buy it than the sales guy knows. When they come to fix it, they can do the basic stuff, they can get it done, but when my header monitor's, yield monitor's playing up, no one can sort it out for me. I've got to try and work it out myself. And as we're going to see this proliferance of ag tech coming in, we're going to see more and more robotics, computer vision, artificial intelligence. We're going to see more and more uses for ag tech, and we're going to need more and more specialists in our regions that's going to get this opportunity for communities to thrive and businesses to form that keep money in our communities and grow opportunities in our regions. And I'm pretty excited about that because there's no way a traditional dealership model is going to deliver that value and that experience for farmers. And that's something we're really passionate about. So, yeah, you're welcome to join us if you love it. But that's what we see with robotics, and that's what we're doing with Swarm Farm, and that's how we're growing rural communities with what we're doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Tess, I'm interested, you're someone who grew up in rural Australia, your relatively early career entering the industry, and I'm interested to hear how you see how we can develop the really amazing ag industry while still having these thriving rural communities.
Yes, and I definitely think that ag tech plays a major role in that. But what we need from ag tech is we need that collaboration with the primary producers on the holes in the market that they're needing to fill. So then ag tech can fill those. So there's the collaboration there. There's the connectivity of can these agricultural technologies actually work in a rural environment? And then once they've been established, the further support. Because if it's just a set and forget and you set up an agricultural, you set up ag tech, but there's no support when things go wrong, that is where the problem is. As Andrew was saying, you can't just expect, you need someone that you're going to be able to call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, there's something wrong here, and not staying on hold for a whole day, being able to have that ongoing support. So yeah, I think the future is very bright where ag tech is concerned.
Awesome, thanks Tess. Jacqueline, is this just, again, another global perspective, is this just a question within Australia, or are you seeing these challenges play out in other communities as well?
They're playing out, and I think there's a game of jeopardy going on because essentially, I'm going to take the AI angle here, artificial intelligence, but I call it AI cubed. Artificial intelligence, artificial insemination, and avian influenza. And if you connect those two together with AI, what we don't see is AI with a social good proposition at the core of it. So I think we should be far more discriminatory about how we use tech, because quite honestly, back in my earlier days when I was on the West Coast in California working in Palo Alto, designing a mouse, if you could imagine it, long before we had all of the fantastic things we have now, we actually hard-baked in how most of our automation, most of our AI is designed, and here today, 40 years later, it's still the same. It's West Coast thinking. And so I have students and researchers who are actually unpacking that and realizing that when you have AI that's driven from experience, so working from the ground upwards, you wouldn't have the systems that we have today. So what I would say is globally, we don't necessarily have to repeat everything, but what we can do is design more intelligently the kinds of automation we want, just like Joe has said, on the farm with that experience, but not necessarily driven by software which comes in from somewhere else which you don't understand. And I think that's a fundamental issue. Question what you have, make it fit for purpose.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jackie. Any final words from our panellists as we wrap up? Any thought bubbles you have?
Yeah,
Anthony,
that's okay.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Look, the biggest industry in Australia is mining and energy. The second biggest industry in Australia is agriculture. They live in the bush. That's where a lot of it is. So and mining will change. We still need to mine for a low carbon society. We'll still need energy, just different forms of it. Thriving mining and energy sector, thriving agricultural sector is critical to communities. The other thing that I see is agri-tourism. Who doesn't love the bush? Like, it is the most beautiful place you can go. It's good for your soul. Get out of the city and get away. And a lot of people appreciate it. I take a lot of people out there. I've done more deals sitting around a campfire in the middle of the Carnarvon Ranges than I have in a boardroom. We just got to create the pathways and opportunities for people to come out and see it, and that will grow more vibrant communities as they're travelling out there. And we saw it in COVID when people couldn't go overseas. Everyone went to the bush. Injune was packed. Like, it was great to see. So
fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll take your campfire analogy. Thank you very much for joining us around this campfire of conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel.